Yo, what's going on, everybody? Unlike most people, I'm actually still pretty new to Zenless on Zero. I'm only level 19 right now, despite playing the game the night that it launched. However, I've been playing the game quite a bit, and I have a general feel for the game. Now, there are aspects of Zenless on Zero that I do enjoy, and some other aspects I think could use a little bit of work. But of course, one thing that I definitely think the game did really good on is the art style and the graphics. Now, this is something that, is pretty common in Hoyoverse games where the graphics look absolutely stunning. Honkai Impact might be a little bit dated, but the graphics are still pretty good for a game of its age. In Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail as well, some of Hoyoverse's newer games have also seen really good art styles, and this game is no exception. They definitely went with a much different vibe for this game as opposed to some of their other games. And I recently visited Taiwan, so it's kind of nice visiting and running around New Eridu and just kind of seeing the place, because it does kind of remind me of my time in Taiwan, which I definitely very enjoyed. So I might be a little bit biased there, but yeah, overall I think the art style is really good, and I think the animations as well, might I add, just look absolutely fluid. I don't think they missed at all. It seems like a very polished game, and especially some of the NPCs, despite them seeming like they might never be playable, the NPCs in this game definitely have a lot more love put into them as opposed to Hoyo versus other games, right? For example, in Honkai Star Rail and in Genshin Impact, all the NPCs are just reskinned models of each other. However, in Zenless Zone Zero, especially New Eridu, like in the main city, you got the noodle guy, they got the nightstand, or not the nightstand, but the dog at the stand. You got the giant cat. My point here is, despite there being a lack of exploration compared to, say, Genshin Impact, I still think that the world is very fluid and there's a lot of life into it. While I didn't have many expectations for the game, since I knew it wasn't going to be open world, I thought that the exploration would have been essentially non-existent like Honkai Impact. I was definitely not expecting a game with such a bright and vibrant world, despite it being so small. Now, next up, I want to talk about the story. Now, a lot of people have personal gripes about the story, saying that it's not really too well, it's boring, it's mid. People say that about the game generally, but I see a lot of the critique. I was gonna say most, but I see a very good amount of the critique about the game, about the story itself. Now, at first, I was pretty invested in the story since it was a brand new story from Hoyoverse, but generally I started to skip through a little bit of the dialogue, and I'm still generally keeping up with the story. However, I don't think it's personally an issue for the game, since Hoyoverse always makes their games live service. They plan on running these games long term, and because of that, the story is generally dragged out, so there's usually a slow start, and then eventually the story will gradually start to pick up. We've seen this, of course, in Genshin Impact, where the story is very slowly starting to pick up, and we've even seen this with Honkai Impact. The story for Honkai Impact at the beginning was pretty similar to Zenless Zone Zero. I even said this in one of my live streams, where the start of the Zenless Zone Zero story felt like it felt very similar to the start of the Honkai Impact story, where the Honkai Impact story started off pretty slow and started to pick up, and it picked up more and more and more, and then eventually it reached its climax, and then it ended, and then now they started off a new story. And we're most likely going to be seeing the same with Zenless Zone Zero, where the story is slow and then it starts to pick up more and more. I don't personally think that the story was necessarily boring. However, I think the story in Honkai Star Rail personally is more intriguing in my opinion. But at the same time, I personally feel like Honkai Star Rail's story never really has any dull moments, but that's just, of course, my opinion. You're all entitled to your own opinion. So the next thing I want to talk about is the combat, and this does, of course, include the stages, which then also includes the TVs. Now, of course, there's no denying that the TVs might be a little bit too prominent. However, of course, the TVs are a way to compensate for the lack of exploration that the game has compared to Hoyo versus other titles, of course, Genshin and Honkai Star Rail. There's no denying though that the TV system is still unique. It's something unique to Zenless Zone Zero that isn't seen in Genshin or any of the Honkai games. But I think that the game would have been better off maybe kept keeping the TV system for certain things. Like maybe we could have kept it exclusively for the endgame content and have the story as just story and combat. I think the TV system works really well in like Hollow Zero, for example, because then you get to choose like the different buffs and everything, kind of like simulated universe in Honkai Star Rail. But I think in the story, it's just more of a hindrance. Again, this is to compensate for the lack of exploration, but in Honkai Impact, there is no exploration or TV system. You load into the stage, you load into combat. Once you're done with the combat, you might have a little bit of dialogue, but that's generally it. Stages in Honkai Impact are essentially the same as they would be in Zenless on Zero without the TV stage, and I think that they actually pulled it off better despite it being a much older game. Now, I'm not saying the TV system is bad, but I'm also not saying it's good. I'm saying that as a beginner, of course, I think that it is better off just in Hollow Zero, and the main story is kept exclusively to dialogue and combat. Now, I can't really talk much for skills because I don't know how they work. I watched a couple guides and I'm still not too sure. I'm still trying to figure them out, but I really like how the combat in Zenless Zone Zero works. You know, switching to different characters, combo attacks, like the skills and stuff like that. I actually think it's really cool. You know, the team building and stuff like that. That's always been something that I really love when it comes to Hoyoverse games, and a lot of people I've seen also complain about the combat, saying that it's too basic, but I personally feel like the combat is actually pretty immersive, at least. The only thing I don't like about it is there's no jump combos, but other than that, I feel like it's generally fine. It plays very similarly to Honkai Impact, and you know, I'm talking from someone who has played Honkai Impact for quite a while before I eventually quit. I did reach level 88, which is the max level, and of course, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but Honkai Impact is from the same studio that made Zenless Zone Zero, so of course there would be similarities. And in fact, if you do generally enjoy Zenless Zone Zero, I think you should try out Honkai Impact as well, but that's just a personal recommendation, right? But I mean, I think the combat is pretty fun. I'm not gonna lie. I still prefer the combat in Honkai Star Rail, the whole turn-based aspect, but I really do enjoy the team building in Zenless Zone Zero, and it feels a little bit more like Genshin in that aspect. I like the whole team synergizing thing. Now I can't really talk for W engines or the discs because I barely have any, but I'm assuming they're similar to Genshin or Honkai Star Rail, and if that's the case, then you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, that's really about it for my beginner review on Zenless Zone Zero. Of course, I don't know everything, so I can't go more in depth on things. But you know, I think the combat is fun, contrary to popular belief. I think the story is decent, but I definitely believe that it will pick up later on in the game's lifespan, per you know every other gacha game out there. But yeah, I'm having a pretty good time with Zenless Zone Zero. I've been playing it casually though, as I've said earlier, and as I might have implied pretty early on in the video. But I think the game does have potential, and I don't think it's a bad game now. You know, like what a lot of people have been saying. I think it's pretty good. Is it Hoyoverse's best game? Not really, in my opinion. I would rather play Genshin Impact or Honkai Star Rail if I had to only play one, but that doesn't mean that Zenless Zone Zero is that bad of a game. It just means it's a good game, but I think Hoyoverse has made better games. But of course, they have also made games that I might not have liked as much as Zenless Zone Zero, for example. Tears of Themis. But yeah, final thoughts on the game. I think the combat is good. The story is pretty decent, but will pick up later on in the game's lifespan. I like Zenless Zone Zero. That's probably what everyone wanted to hear. I like the game as a beginner. I haven't even progressed that much through Hollow Zero yet, but yeah, I like the game. But I might make an updated video once I'm a little bit more experienced on the game, but that's really about it. Goodbye.